We were all blind to the truth, the public, the neighbors, and the family. But who actually needed to know? The supervisors and the department leading this since day one, they were wrong, and the evidence has made that impossible to deny. This is no longer just a missing person file. It is the grim story of what happened after Nancy Guthrie disappeared. It is about the decisions made in those first golden hours and the assumptions that turned out to be completely wrong. We must examine the man leading this investigation whose entire professional record is now coming under heavy scrutiny, and why everything the public thought they understood about this investigation has shifted so violently. I am the lead investigator on this case. Before we go deeper into this investigation, if you enjoy real true crime cases like this, consider subscribing to the channel because we break down cases most people miss. And make sure to watch until the end, because the final detail completely changes how this case should be understood. You and I will track every detail of this investigation together to uncover the truth, not just the headlines. If you are joining our investigation, subscribe now and like this post. I want to hear your theories on the Nancy Guthrie case. I review every report and message. Now let us step into the details of the night that caught everyone off guard. February 1st, 2026. Sunday morning in Tucson, Arizona. The Catalina Foothills sit right on the edge of the vast Sonoran Desert. It is an affluent, quiet patch of land where privacy is everything. This is where retired professionals and families live behind iron gates tucked away within the quiet desert landscape. Normally, the biggest worry here is a coyote crossing the yard. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was not a celebrity herself, but she was the mother of a very famous face on American television. Savannah Guthrie, host of The Today Show, built her entire career in front of millions of American viewers. Her mother Nancy lived a peaceful life in her Tucson home, surrounded by the dry desert heat. No one saw this coming. Nobody expected to find blood staining the entrance to such a quiet, private home. Nobody thought a camera would catch something that would rattle the nation. No one imagined Nancy Guthrie would just vanish that Sunday. But she did. And here's the first critical mistake we all made in this case. In the opening hours of the investigation, the first responders on the scene made a critical, fatal call. They saw the scene where an 84-year-old woman vanished, saw the blood, and somehow decided she had simply gotten lost. A senior citizen was gone, there was blood on her front door, and the initial word was that she had just walked away. That flawed approach. That assumption dictated the response and wasted those crucial first hours. In this line of work, those hours are everything. Sources close to the case told the press that those early moments were the most important of all. When reporters arrived at the Guthrie home a few days later, they saw things that did not add up. Things that should have been impossible. They realized they could walk right onto the property without any resistance at all. A news crew could walk right into an active crime scene, the home of a missing woman, without being stopped once. There were no officers, no yellow tape, and no barriers around the area where that blood was found. So they did the job the police were not doing. They walked the grounds, filmed the stains on the driveway, and documented everything. That evidence would eventually be seen by millions of people across the country on the nightly news. Those images did not come from a police briefing. They came directly from a reporter's lens. It was not an official statement. It was a journalist who got close because nobody was there to protect the scene. When that footage aired, the department panicked. 3 days after the initial report, the sheriff finally returned to seal the property. 3 whole days. An 84-year-old woman's blood was at that entrance, and for 3 days, that scene was open to anyone on foot. It was the first crack in the official story, the moment where investigative reporting revealed a failure that should never have happened. But it was just the start. Stick with me. We need to look at what the investigators were actually seeing. Nancy Guthrie's front door had a doorbell camera installed. That lens caught a suspect, a real person lurking around the house right before Nancy disappeared without a trace. The FBI stepped in and officially released that surveillance video to the public. They were desperate for the public's help to move this investigation forward. They hoped someone would recognize the figure, file a report, and provide the lead that would crack this case wide open. The forensic experts who analyzed the footage came to a conclusion that was deeply disturbing. I've studied those few seconds of tape repeatedly. The suspect's posture, his gait, every movement was cold and calculated. The footage told me this wasn't some impulsive mistake. This wasn't just a simple crime of opportunity. I wasn't looking for a random stranger who just happened to be passing by that night. This was the work of someone who knew the layout perfectly, someone who had calmly weighed their options, someone who meticulously planned every detail. We realized quickly that this case was far more complex than we first thought. Reports suggested a chilling theory. The suspect might have used a signal jammer to block all wireless communications. That device would have killed the security feed instantly, ensuring no alert ever reached the monitoring station. It rendered the entire system useless in the dead of night. You and I need to consider what that implies. If the jammer theory holds up, it means the suspect had been casing the property for some time. They knew exactly where the cameras were and brought specialized gear to bypass every security measure in the house. They stalked the perimeter in the dark, activated their equipment to blind the cameras, and then made their move. Evidence suggests that someone was digitally tracking that exact address long before February 1st arrived. The Google Trends data I pulled during the investigation revealed something that gave me the chills. Someone had been searching for Nancy Guthrie's exact address in that exclusive Catalina Foothills neighborhood. They were looking for specific exterior photos, hunting for every detail of the private property's layout. Back in March 2025 and again in late November, someone was meticulously studying that house. They were scouring photos and mapping out the scene months in advance. It was cold-blooded preparation. We were wrong to think this was random. By early March 2026, new evidence crossed my desk. Crucial new physical evidence was discovered just a short distance from Nancy Guthrie's front door. My team found a glove nearby. This discovery was made public on March 4th. It was part of the heavy media coverage. I sent that glove straight to the lab for expert analysis. If we found DNA, we could finally link it to the suspect on the tape or get a definitive answer. To the public watching us, every single piece of evidence felt like it could be the big breakthrough. A glove tire tracks a stray hair. Each discovery forced the same question: will this finally crack the case? But I have to share the stark reality that finally came to light. It was a truth that completely shifted how people viewed the state of this investigation. The DNA I found inside the house didn't belong to Nancy. It was a completely unknown profile. Genetic material from a total stranger was left in the home of that missing 84-year-old woman. This should have been the end of the mystery, our smoking gun, but the sample was heavily contaminated. There was DNA from multiple people, all tangled together, making a clean identification absolutely impossible for my team. I called in forensic expert CC Moore to take charge and analyze this nightmare of a sample. She is a world-class authority on genealogy, someone who has identified killers that my colleagues pursued for decades. After looking at the data, she told me straight, my team had to go back to Nancy's house. We needed cleaner samples and better evidence genetic material, far more accurate than anything we had recovered initially. She also mentioned new lab tech under development that could finally disentangle these complex DNA mixtures for us. This tech would do the impossible. You and I are looking at specialized private centers now for help. And then that one uncomfortable question surfaced, the one nobody in the department dared to say out loud. If we were going back to the scene for better samples, I had to consider the state of that house. A camera crew had been walking freely through the property for 3 days after my initial search. Was the scene still intact? How much of the original evidence from February 1st had been compromised? How much contamination were we facing? I was wrong to believe our initial reaction was enough. By April 1st, 2026, 60 days of my relentless search for Nancy Guthrie had passed. A source from within the Pima County Sheriff's Department finally decided to step forward. This informant had been watching the investigation from the start and decided he'd seen too much. He spoke out. We're about to uncover his devastating account of how this investigation truly began. That single moment shattered the public trust, exposing a mountain of errors piling up since February 1st. The first supervisor on the scene at Nancy Guthrie House dictated everything. He set the tone for the entire forensic process. He made the calls on evidence collection, steering the opening hours of the most publicized disappearance we had ever seen. In all my years in Arizona, I had never investigated a homicide, not once, where we found blood right in the open. Fresh blood was staining the threshold. To any experienced eye, this screamed a violent, forced abduction. The whole nation was tuned in. Yet the guy running the show had absolutely zero experience in the field. He had never led a murder probe or a kidnapping. My source told Brian Entin that this incompetence was fatal. That lack of seasoned instinct led them to assume Nancy just walked away. That rush to judgment poisoned the scene. They worked the scene without urgency or protocol. Leads were tossed aside, and what remained was hopelessly contaminated by amateurs. We call it the golden window, the first 24 to 72 hours. They let it slip right through their fingers. The investigation was left to a man who simply lacked the intuition to grasp the gravity of the evidence. Former Federal Bureau of Investigation agents Andrew Black and Jonathan Gilliam scrutinized the informant's account. These are career federal men, and they both gave Brian Entin the same cold truth. We have seen this before. They knew the drill. When a precinct values loyalty over actual skill, the cracks start showing when things get real. Promotion is about who you know, not what you can do. The informant's testimony was cutting and left no doubt. When my source described the culture Nanos imposed on Pima County, they were brutally honest. He ruined a great department. Those 5 words landed with the heavy weight of a final crushing verdict. This is where the case moves beyond incompetence and becomes something far more troubling. See, what Brian Entin and the press dug up on Sheriff Chris Nanos was not just a series of blunders. It was a deep dive into who Chris Nanos was before he pinned on that star. It was about his honesty. The timing could not have been worse. December 2025, just weeks before Nancy Guthrie vanished into thin air. Sheriff Nanos sat in the witness chair testifying under oath during a lawsuit brought by Sergeant Aaron Cross. As head of the Pima Deputies Association, Cross's team grilled Nanos about every dark corner of his disciplinary history. They pressed him on his record as a cop. Nanos looked them in the eye and swore he'd never been suspended. He swore his career was clean of any formal disciplinary suspensions. As we later found out, that was a lie. Back in 1982 at the El Paso Police Department, Chris Nanos turned in his badge just to outrun a suspension. He resigned to dodge a 3-day hit for insubordination slipping away before the official paperwork could ever catch him. He quit to keep his jacket clean. Yet 4 decades later, under the penalty of perjury, he denied it again. Right here in Pima County, he stood by that clean record. Later, his attorney tried to bury truth in 12 pages. The legal spin was that since he quit before the hammer fell, he had not technically been suspended from the force. The defense was weak. He claimed he misunderstood the question, thinking they were only asking about his time at the Pima office. He acted like his past in other agencies did not count. That technicality did not sit well with the courtroom. For those of us watching this grim case, the excuse fell flat. We wanted to know what caused the punishment initially. We had to dig deeper into the actual misconduct that triggered that disciplinary action all those years ago. Old reports told a violent story. Nanos allegedly slammed a flashlight into a handcuffed suspect's head with massive bone-breaking force. The suspect's injuries were grave. He was rushed to the intensive care unit. That violent encounter sparked a civil lawsuit against the entire department. Dr. Matt Hines, a Pima County supervisor, sat down with Brian Entin and leveled a heavy, direct accusation. He fired off what might be the most damning charge against a sitting sheriff that I have seen in years. If that violent history had been on the table, it likely would have blocked Chris Nanos from ever being hired. He never would have been pinned as an officer in Arizona. Hines was clear the man lied under oath. Then Hines said the words that sealed it. Officer Chris Nanos must resign immediately. By April 7th, 2026, the Pima Board of Supervisors finally stepped in, formally demanding answers from the sheriff. They fired off a list of hard questions and formal inquiries to the top officials overseeing the department's operations. They dug into his shadowed background, demanding explanations for the glaring lies found in his sworn court statements. Nanos fired back through his counsel on April 21st. His attorney admitted the resignation was simply a strategic move to dodge a formal administrative suspension. Their story. He just misheard the question or confused it with a separate security agency. He insisted his 20 years in Pima County were beyond reproach, spotless. Impeachment efforts against Nanos began while the public watched this criminal probe unfold. For 90 days, you and I watched Nancy Guthrie's family plead for the truth. A compromised crime scene sat open for days while an informant leaked the internal details. Word got out that the lead officer had zero homicide experience. The public had enough. April 21st, 2026. 80 days after Nancy vanished, we finally got Nanos in the chair. He sat under oath before a room already clutching his lawyer's 12-page defense letter. He faced investigators who knew precisely what those sealed El Paso records really contained. The man who swore he was never suspended took the stand while the entire country watched for a slip-up. The case file grew strange, Bitcoin-coded messages and a shadowy suspect nicknamed A. The heat on Nanos intensified while the press tracked every scrap of fresh forensic evidence. Strip away the politics and failed leadership, and you and I are still left with one suspect. Amidst DNA results and signal jammers, the investigation took a major turn on day 79. Early on, we tracked a message and a crypto account straight back to the kidnapping. Monitors watched for a Bitcoin payment to the kidnappers, but that digital currency was never actually sent. We made the call no ransom. Then a new name surfaced in our files, Tommaso Cione. My team and I began scouring a property tied directly to this particular person of interest. We were dissecting how this find would shift the entire course of the case. Major media outlets reported receiving messages from an unknown source who claimed to have key information about Nancy. Some of these tipsters were just predators demanding cash for a piece of the truth. We could not verify the tips, but then multiple ransom notes began surfacing everywhere. The notes went to the family, the media, and even hit Savannah Guthrie's desk. She later admitted she felt some of those notes were the real deal, the actual captors. She felt they were messages from the kidnappers exposing secrets that had been buried. We found the mother's back doors wide open, and they were propped that way intentionally. This was a home where an 84-year-old woman lived all by herself, vulnerable. We pulled in retired bureau experts to look at the patterns. All signs pointed one way. This was a calculated personal hit. Whoever pulled this off knew exactly what they were doing. We made a mistake assuming she just wandered off. There was never any evidence for that. It was guesswork. Everyone assumed an elderly woman must be disoriented just because of her age. Call it what it was, age bias masquerading as a lead. It cost us precious time. We were dead wrong to think that crime scene was actually secure. It wasn't. Reporters wandered the property for 3 days before anyone bothered to tape off the perimeter. How much evidence was lost or contaminated in those 72 hours you and I will never know. It was a mistake to believe this complex case was being handled with real expertise. The supervisor on scene during those first critical hours had never even run a murder case. Never. That lack of seasoned judgment poisoned every step of the investigation that followed. We fell into the trap of thinking DNA would be our silver bullet. It wasn't. Between a compromised crime scene and technological limitations, our best forensic lead became one massive nightmare. We also assumed the man running this show was actually qualified for the job. Wrong again. Nanos quit the El Paso force back in 1982 just to outrun a suspension. He beat a handcuffed man with a flashlight until the guy landed in intensive care. Brutal. He built a department where blind loyalty was prized far more than investigative competence. Under oath in December 2025, he swore to us that none of it was true. From the moment he reached that compromised crime scene until he faced the Pima County supervisor. Demanding the sheriff's resignation, he forced us to see this whole case differently. He didn't invent evidence, he just refused to ignore the facts already hiding in plain sight. By late April 2026, Nancy Guthrie had been missing for more than 80 days. Savannah Guthrie walked away from the Today Show, even skipping the 2026 Winter Olympics. To find her mother, she offered a $1 million reward for any lead that helps. She gave another $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A retired detective reviewing the files publicly denied the idea that this investigation has stalled out. He claimed the team is still out there chasing leads and pushing for the truth. But he also warned with a veteran's cold honesty that this mystery won't be solved quickly. Understanding what happened to Nancy Guthrie could take many more months or even several years. We just don't know, he said. Those words hit harder when it's your own flesh and blood. When you are Savannah Guthrie searching for an 84-year-old mother who just vanished. You and I wonder how it feels when the authorities say they simply have no idea. The suspect's behavioral profile is ready, a dark psychological portrait built from every piece of evidence. Notes, videos, and months of surveillance. That Tucson property is already being processed by my team. Entin is still there reporting, asking the hard questions that keep the heat on this case. Pima supervisors now have the 12-page legal defense from the sheriff's own attorney. The impeachment continues. We'll see if the man in charge can survive this audit of his record. DNA analysis is ongoing. We're hoping forensic technology will finally identify the sample we found. Genetic genealogy will give us a real name and lead us to a real suspect soon. That Bitcoin account remains a central part of our active criminal investigation. Every message sent to the media is being thoroughly picked apart for hidden clues. The ransom notes Savannah believes are real are being analyzed for every tiny linguistic and forensic detail. Between the science, politics, and journalism, the agonizing wait for a break in the case continues. At the center is an 84-year-old woman who deserves to come home. This case was marked by early failures and the flawed assumptions that led the search astray. Leadership failures turned errors into a political scandal that is now consuming the man at the top. But the journalistic work on this case has revealed a very different side of the story. It shows us that the truth, even when buried by institutional cover-ups, will eventually surface. Even at a crime scene, the authorities failed to protect secrets are still waiting for us. The truth always finds a way out because someone is always there to catch it. You and I will watch, and Brian will ensure we don't miss the moment it breaks. That's where the case stands, right now, still full of unanswered questions, still unfolding, and still under investigation. If you followed this case with me, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next update as new evidence comes in. And I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think really happened in the Nancy Guthrie case? Leave your theory in the comments. I read them all.